Paul Elkins is standing in a parking lot in Washington State with 4 sheets of corrugated plastic leaning against his truck. Just another gray Pacific Northwest afternoon. He's got a Dremel in his tool bag, a bag of zip ties, and fold lines he'd scored into the plastic the night before. A pattern he'd worked out on graph paper at his kitchen table. He unfolds the first sheet, then the second, snaps the fold line up, runs a zip tie through the holes he pre-punched along the edge. Third sheet, fourth, the roof panel hinges up, latches into place. He steps back. 4 walls, a peaked roof, a door that closes, a latch that locks from the inside. 20 minutes, maybe less. The thing that stops him there, standing in this wet parking lot looking at a structure he just built from what is basically glorified yard sign material, isn't pride exactly. It's closer to a quiet kind of disbelief. Because this works. This actually works. And if it works, then something very large and very expensive that a lot of very credentialed people have been failing to solve for 40 years might have been solvable the whole time by a guy with a Dremel and $120. He takes out his phone and starts filming. The video went everywhere. Comments in the thousands. From California, from Oregon, from Texas, from places with no YouTube channels making content about them. People in other countries. People who'd never built anything. And the thing they kept writing wasn't cool concept. It was, where do I get the plans? Paul Elkins is 67, retired Boeing worker. Decades of building things with his hands, not designing things, not managing things, but building them. The kind of knowledge that tells you when something will hold and when it won't, when a fold line will stay crisp and when it'll crack. He posted the plans. For free. Deliberately free, because he has a philosophy. Useful things should move, should spread without friction, should find the people who need them without making those people pay a toll to access something basic. No patent, no nonprofit, just a website and a video and a set of instructions anyone can download. Within months, the photos started coming back. A guy in rural Montana who put one up behind his barn, a family in Arizona who keep one packed flat in their SUV as a fire evacuation shelter, a woman in Washington who built one in her backyard for her son, and a man in Portland, and this one hit different, who'd been sleeping in doorways, built one in an afternoon, and sent Paul a photo of the door. Just the door, closed, latched. He said he'd never gotten a photo that meant more than that. The worst part of sleeping outside isn't the cold, it isn't the hunger. The people who've been through it describe something else as the thing that undoes you. The exposure. Nothing between you and everything else. No walls, no door, no lock. You can't put anything down without it getting stolen. You can't sleep deeply because you have to stay alert. And a tent is just a slightly better version of nothing. It's fabric. Rain eventually wins. Wind eventually wins. And it signals to everyone who walks past it exactly what it means. Not a home, not even close to a home. And that signal works on you too, from the inside. Corey Aslin is 53. He lives in Eugene, Oregon, and he understands all of this without needing it explained. He had a job, an apartment, a life that worked, not glamorous, just functional. Then a spinal injury, surgeries that didn't fully fix it, months of recovery that stretched longer than his savings. He told a reporter, "So many people are a paycheck or 2 away from losing housing. That's what happened to me." And then he was sleeping outside in Eugene, a city that has been trying and failing to solve its homelessness crisis for the better part of a decade. Tent cities, encampment sweeps, task forces, more task forces, reports, always more reports. What there wasn't, until a couple named Eric and Faye DeBurr started building in their backyard, was something that looked like a house. Eric DeBurr is hard to categorize. Artist and builder and activist, and none of those labels quite fit alone, but together they add up to something. He lives in West Eugene with his wife Faye and their son. 2 small huts, side by side, connected by a deck, each one about 60 square feet. Curved roof, polycarbonate panels over a wood frame, a door that closes all the way and locks. He calls them Conestoga huts, after the covered wagons, the same rounded silhouette, the same sense of a structure built for moving through hard terrain. The thing that matters, he didn't design them for other people. He designed them and moved into them. He lives in the thing he made. That's a different kind of commitment than building a prototype and pitching it to a city council. That's putting your body inside your own idea and saying, "This is real enough for me." He started community-supported shelters in 2013 out of Eugene because he'd built his own and couldn't understand why more people weren't doing this. The huts cost around $1,000 in materials if you're buying everything new, less with salvage materials, and Eugene has salvage materials, a few hours with a volunteer crew. No contractor, no permit required in most configurations because the footprint sits below the square footage threshold that triggers the formal inspection process. But the actual thing, the thing that matters, is that they're not tents. When you move into a Conestoga hut, you're moving into something that has walls standing by themselves, a door people have to knock on before opening, something that looks, from the outside, like someone chose it, not like someone ran out of options. Like someone made a decision. Corey Aslan moved into Wanted Opportunity Village, the community-supported shelter site in Eugene. He could lock his medication away for the first time in months. He could sleep through the night. He could stop running the mental math of survival every waking hour and start thinking about what he actually wanted to happen next. Not just the next hour. Not just the next sweep. That's a luxury that sounds basic until you understand what it costs to lose it. He said it changed everything, not fixed. Changed. He was careful about that word. The injury was still real. The debt was still there. But something shifted. The door had something to do with it. The physical fact of a door. Of being inside a space and choosing when to open it. 1,200 miles east, in Colorado, in 2002, a man named Vinay Gupta sat down at a whiteboard at the Rocky Mountain Institute and tried to solve something that had been bothering him for years. Buckminster Fuller's geodesic domes are structurally brilliant, but they're a nightmare to build in the field. Too many different panel sizes, too many things that can go wrong with untrained volunteers in the rain. Gupta wanted something you could explain to anyone and they could build with hand tools. He cracked it in about 15 minutes of sketching. The Hexayurt. 6-sided, built from panels all cut from the same 4x8 foot sheet stock. The geometry is handled at the design stage, not the build stage. Whoever's assembling it doesn't need to understand geometry. They just need to follow the pattern. 3 people. About an hour. Panels. Specialty tape, flat ground. He released it into the public domain immediately. No patent. No licensing fee. Just, here it is. Use it. The Hexayurt went to Burning Man in 2003. It went to Haiti after the earthquake. It went into Pentagon research on humanitarian aid logistics. The website where you download the plans hasn't been redesigned since roughly the Obama administration. That's not a criticism. The plans still work. Materials run $300 to $450 total, under $500 all in. And you have a weatherproof structure that stood up to Nevada desert summers and Pacific Northwest winters. Every year at Burning Man, around 100 of these silver hexagonal domes appear in the same field where the first one stood, in 2003. Not because those people are homeless, not because they need emergency housing. They build them because the design is so clean, so satisfying in its solution, that putting one together became its own kind of thing. Useful things acquire followers who don't need to use them yet. Paul Elkins released his plans for free. Vinay Gupta put the Hexayurt in the public domain on day 1. Eric DeBure publishes the Conestoga Hut Build Manual and tells anyone who wants it to just use it. None of these people were trying to own what they made. They were trying to make sure it spread. Compare that to how housing problems usually get solved in America, or, more accurately, don't get solved. Venture capital, pilot programs, requests for proposals, 6-month timelines that become 18-month timelines that become, we're still in the planning phase. There's a person in a planning office somewhere who's been writing the same report since 2017. Meanwhile, the number of people sleeping outside keeps going up, and the cost of solving it keeps going up, and the gap between those two things keeps widening. Something happened when people stopped waiting for the system and started working with whatever was in their garage. Paul Elkins built something in a parking lot that works. Vinay Gupta sketched something on a whiteboard in 15 minutes that's been deployed in disaster zones on 3 continents. Eric DeBure is living in the thing he designed, and Corey Aslan is sleeping through the night because of it. The solutions that spread tend to be the simple ones, not the funded ones, not the certificated ones, the ones that someone could explain to a neighbor in 5 minutes and that neighbor could build next weekend. 3,000 miles from Eugene, in Redondo Beach, California, a man named Benny Pacheco spent 6 years homeless. 6 years is a long time to sleep outside. He built a different kind of map of that city, not the map of restaurants and parks that people who live inside use, but the map of shade and dry pavement and places where things don't get swept. The overpasses, the doorways with the right overhang, where his stuff would still be in the morning. He moved into a Pallet shelter in 2021. Pallet is based in Everett, Washington, the commercial end of the fold-flat spectrum. Fiberglass panels on aluminum frames snapped together without tools. The company says 20 minutes. Press coverage says 30 to 60, but the point stands. Their smallest unit costs $7,500, not $1,000. That's the honest number. But it's also not a tent city, and city governments have been buying them because a crew can stand up a 50-unit village in a week, which no other option in American emergency housing has been able to claim. Amy King started Pallet with her husband Brady in 2016. She was running a small construction company in Seattle, the kind that employed people who'd been through incarceration, through addiction, people the regular hiring system had written off. She watched the Hurricane Katrina coverage in 2005, watched 30,000 people on cots in the Superdome, and what kept running through her mind wasn't a political reaction. It was an engineering question. Why is this the best we can do? You have 30,000 people who need a room with a door and a lock. Stadiums don't provide that. Tents don't provide that. And yet that was the response, the same response that disaster after disaster had produced. And nobody seemed to be asking why. 10 years later, she built something that snaps together in under an hour, stands for 10 years, locks from the inside, and moves when it needs to move. Pallet's revenue jumped from $250,000 in 2019 to $10 million in 2020. More than 80% of the people who work there have personally been through homelessness, addiction, or incarceration. That's not a mission statement. That's just who Amy King hired. Benny Pacheco told a reporter he hadn't felt safe in 6 years. That first night in the shelter, he did. Alexandria Shore lives in a Pallet shelter in North Hollywood. She said what she noticed first wasn't the walls or the roof. It was the quiet. Just the quiet of being inside something. Here's the honest range, because the numbers are all over the place. At $120, you're building Paul Elkins' Coroplast shelter yourself in an afternoon with materials from Home Depot and a free PDF. Waterproof, rigid, lockable, packable, flat. Real. Around $300 to $450, a Hexayurt. 3 people, about an hour, field-tested in conditions that would destroy most commercial tents. At $1,000 in materials, a Conestoga hut. Curved roof, insulated walls, proper door. Something that looks like a decision. At $1,150, the IKEA Foundation's Better Shelter, designed with UNHCR, deployed in refugee camps across 30 countries, flat-packed into 2 boxes, solar lamp included. Over 30,000 units out there. The only manufactured product in this range that actually hits near $1,000. And at $7,500, Pallet, the version cities buy. None of these are the same thing, but they all come from the same question. What if shelter arrived as a flat stack of panels instead of lumber and nails and a crew and a 6-month timeline? The flat pack concept existed in the 60s. What changed in the last 15 years isn't the technology. It's the network. YouTube, Instructables, Reddit threads that stay up for years and get found by people who need them. Paul Elkins posts a video. A man in Portland builds a shelter and sends him a photo of a door. That feedback loop didn't exist in 2002. It does now. In August 2023, A wildfire destroyed most of Lahaina on the island of Maui. Neighborhoods gone in an afternoon. Over 1,000 homes. FEMA showed up with what FEMA shows up with: hotel vouchers, rental assistance, a process that moves slowly, designed for institutional procurement and not for the speed at which people need roofs. As of 2026, FEMA has extended housing assistance for Lahaina survivors to February 2027, 3.5 years after the fire. Meanwhile, at the University of Maine, a professor named Masood Reis Rahani and his graduate student Anthony Verzoni had been working on folding panel shelters, origami engineering applied to rigid building materials, a structure that collapses flat for shipping and unfolds on-site in minutes. Funded by the U.S. Army, their goal, Verzoni said in an interview, is mass production for humanitarian aid operations. He's building what Paul Elkins built in a parking lot, but with Army funding and engineering degrees. A retired Boeing worker with a Dremel and a University of Maine lab with federal funding converged on almost exactly the same answer. That says something. The answer was always the same. Always flat panels. Always fast assembly. Always a door that locks from the inside. The question was never what to build. It was who was going to start. There's a loose community building these right now. No clean name, no central organization. Spread across YouTube channels and Instructables pages and prepper forums and off-grid homesteading groups. Some are preppers who want a shelter that can come off a trailer after a fire evacuation. Some bought land in the mountains and need something standing, while they build something permanent. Some watched the Lahaina footage and started thinking about what they'd do if their neighborhood was next. And then, there are the people who don't say loudly why they're building. A paycheck or two from needing it, watching the rental market in their city, and doing the math. Not in crisis today, but close enough that the margin feels thin. Building before it gets bad. But it's also the kind of thing you don't post about on social media, because I made a $300 backup shelter in case I end up homeless is a sentence most people don't know how to receive. That's the part of this story nobody talks about loudly. The distance between housed and unhoused in America, for a lot of people, isn't a canyon. It's a step, a spinal injury, a layoff, a landlord who sells the building. And having something that folds flat in a truck bed is the step you catch yourself on. Paul Elkins said in an interview that he doesn't quite understand why the shelter hit the way it did. He's made more technically interesting things. The shelter is, in his own words, embarrassingly simple. The geometry is basic. The materials are obvious. Once you see it, you feel like you should have already known it. Maybe that's exactly why it worked. There's something disorienting about a solution that obvious. Not admiration, something more like a quiet anger at the gap. This was here the whole time? 4 $17 sheets of plastic. We've got people sleeping in doorways, and the answer was, at Home Depot? That gap between the simplicity of the answer and the scale of the problem produces a feeling that doesn't resolve. It just sits there. The comments on his video don't sound like opinions. They sound like something released. People saying they didn't know this was possible. People who built one and showed a neighbor who built one. People in countries where Paul Elkins has never been, writing in languages he doesn't speak, saying they built one and it worked. He keeps reading them. There's a specific comment he mentioned. A guy who'd been sleeping rough watched the video 3 times before going to Home Depot. Took him closer to 2 hours because he'd never used a Dremel. But it was up, and he sent Paul a single photo, the door, not the whole shelter, just the door, closed with a latch on it. Paul Elkins said he's made things he's more technically proud of. But that photo is the one he comes back to. Someone had a door that they controlled. That's the thing. The Lawrence Journal World ran an investigation in February 2024 about a 50-unit Pallet village. Headline, 64 square-foot homes at more than $40,000 each. The Pallet shelter cost $7,500. The rest is infrastructure, permitting, management contracts, the overhead of a city government procurement process. By the time bureaucracy is done with a $7,500 shelter, it costs $40,000. Community-supported shelters in Eugene builds a Conestoga hut for $1,000 in materials and a day of volunteer labor. No procurement, no RFP, no 6-month pilot. They just build it. Eugene had to create a special experimental zoning designation to make it legal. The rules were written to prevent slumlords cramming people into fire traps, and those rules don't distinguish between a dangerous structure and a Conestoga hut. So the Conestoga hut technically breaks the rules in most American cities, which means a retired Boeing worker's $120 emergency shelter is also, technically, illegal to set up in most of the places people most need it. Other cities are watching Eugene. It moves slowly. It always moves slowly. Meanwhile, Paul Elkins posts another video. And here's the thing that none of the architects, none of the developers, none of the policy consultants who've spent decades on the American housing problem want to say out loud. The answer was at Home Depot. A $17 sheet of corrugated plastic, a fold line, a zip tie, and a latch. Vinay Gupta cracked it in 15 minutes on a whiteboard. Eric DeBoer cracked it in his backyard in Eugene and then moved into it. Paul Elkins cracked it in his garage in Washington and posted the plans for free. The problem was never the technology. The flat panel concept has existed for 60 years. The problem was that nobody with money and authority believed the answer could be that simple. So they funded complexity instead, a thing that required a contractor and a permit and a 2-year timeline and an impact assessment. The people who solved it didn't have authority. They had garages and graph paper and the conviction that something basic shouldn't require something complex. Corey Aslan has a door. It opens from the inside. Not everyone who needs one has one yet. Most don't. The distance between this idea and the scale at which it would actually help is still enormous, and closing it would require political will that hasn't materialized, and maybe won't. But somewhere in the Pacific Northwest right now, someone just finished watching Paul Elkins' video. They're writing down a list. 4 sheets of corrugated plastic, zip ties, a Dremel, a latch. They're going to Home Depot in the morning. And in about 20 minutes after they get back, they'll have a door.